Hello, everybody, and welcome to Thursday. It's Thursday, and you may notice I'm kind of in a different environment today. That's because I've lost power, and I'm at my in-laws' house doing this for you guys out there. So hopefully you appreciate it. We're having an amazing show tonight. I'm going to bring on my guest, Jess Infante. Jess, thank you so much for being part of the show. Hope you're in a better spot than I am at my in-laws' house, for lack of a better word.
I think I am. Well, thanks so much for having me, Greg. I'm so excited to be here. I don't usually get to be on the other side of this, so this is fun and different.
Yes.
But
it's going to be interesting. You're going to be on the hot seat today, usually the other way around, where I'm on the hot seat with you. So we're super excited. But before we get into all of that, it's the most important part of any virtual happy hour is the beer, because we're trying to do a virtual happy hour that we couldn't do in person. So, Jess, what are you drinking on your side over there?
I am drinking a Decita from Notch. That's my local brewery up here in Salem, Mass. They brewed this for their 10th anniversary this year, which would have been earlier in the spring. Unfortunately, didn't get to have a big celebration, but everybody liked the beer so much that they just brewed it again. So it's a nice Czech pale lager, really easy to drink, very true to style. They're kind of all about that. Like, let's be super traditional.
Notch is very traditional. Big fan of those of them up there. They always have two style beers, probably the best way to describe them from that perspective there. Very good. Well, I'm drinking a KCBC. This is a Dangerously Precedent IPA, because today actually is IPA day, which pretty much is every day of the year, but let's celebrate it on a day. This is a double IPA out of Brooklyn, New York. This is a great brewery. I've had a chance to try them a few times when I live in New York, and now we're going to try it here. So if you're at home right now, crack open your beverage and pour it out into your can or drink from a glass. Make sure you check in on Untappd. Use the venue Untappd at home. And if you're drinking an IPA, you're going to actually earn a badge with it too, because everyone loves to earn those badges. It's the most important part, right? And also Untappd tells everybody that you're drinking home is safely, and that is the most important too. So everyone makes fun of me for pouring poorly, but look at this, guys. I actually poured it right this time.
I was just going to ask if you needed coaching.
I do need some coaching, but I think I've got it already. But cheers, everybody. Thank you so much for watching, and enjoy your beverage. Delicious. Well, let's get right into it, Jess. Obviously, you have a pretty big history when it comes to beer, but in case of the people don't know what you write for, what you do, quick background of how you got in this industry and who you're writing for today.
Sure. So I'm a reporter at Brewbound. We're a Boston area publication covering the beer industry. The way that I really like to describe it is that we're definitely a business publication first, and we just happen to cover beer. So it's a lot of like really business oriented stuff. But before that, I worked at the Boston Beer Company, Brews with Samuel Adams, started there 10 years ago as a tour guide when I started grad school, moved up to Boston to get a master's in marketing, and worked at the brewery, moved over to the national brand department, went back to the brewery, and then last summer decided it was time for a new fun adventure. So
how did you move from marketing over from Boston Beer to writing? Because obviously there is some commonalities there, but what made that give you that jump to say, hey, you know what, I want to start reporting on beer and doing in the writing sense?
Great question. I actually used to be a reporter. I went to college for journalism. I went to Syracuse, studied magazine journalism, which is about as useful as a degree in like steamship engineering. But after college, worked for the Asbury Park Press, which is the daily newspaper at the Jersey Shore. So that's where I'm from. So did that for a while. And, in like 07, 08, 09, like things were really rough, and it didn't really look like being a journalist was really going to be something that could carry me through a career. So I wanted to find, maybe a master's program that could help me keep writing and still doing that. That's like what I'm good at and what I like doing, but figure out a way to keep me employed. So I found a master's program at Emerson College in Boston, integrated marketing communication. Just happened to need a part-time job. And my husband said, well, what if you gave brewery tours? And I was like, I don't like public speaking. You're out of your mind. But it all worked out. And that guy's been drinking free beer for a long time.
Well, it's funny you mentioned being a tour guide there. I think the Sam Adams one in Jamaica Plains, Massachusetts is probably an interesting tour to begin with. And I highly recommend, obviously not during COVID now, but if you're in that area, it's definitely an entertaining tour. As I recall from the very end, it's been a while since I've been there, they take you into the kind of the R&D room and you try some different beers that may not ever see the light of day. So it's obviously a great opportunity to try some things that are maybe just kind of being thought of when it comes to that tour specifically. That's still the case from when you remember that?
Yeah. There's a tap room on site in JP. There's now a tap room in downtown Boston. I'm not sure if that is reopened, but both of those bars have like 16 to 20 draft lines that most of which are just kind of experimental one-offs.
Awesome.
So it's
very good. Cool. Well, if you're joining us late, we're talking to Jess Infante, who's a reporter from Brewbound, which is a beer publication. If you want to ask a question for Jess, ask on your platform you're watching, Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube. We want to put Jess in the hot seat today. She puts a lot of people when she reports in the hot seat. Now it's our time to get her in the hot seat. So let us know if you have any questions. We'd love to hear from you. And also happy IPA Day to everyone who's saying in the chat right now on what beer they're drinking. Obviously, Jess, with the stuff that's been happening with COVID, it's probably driven a lot of your storylines in terms of what you're working on. We talked a little bit beforehand about the effects of a lot of to-go beer breweries doing to-go and delivery is on the can industry and the aluminum being a little shortage. Talk a little bit about how that process is. And people don't really know about so much, how much of a big deal this is for people to make beer or any beverage in an aluminum can.
Right. So there's really only two producers of aluminum cans. The biggest one is Ball. They had their second quarter earnings call today, and basically they make a lot, and then the cans will like trickle down throughout, various like vendors then to much smaller breweries and things like that. But if you're really small and you don't have a really big can contract, you're kind of in a tough spot right now because their inventory is pretty much entirely sold out. They did have some good news on their earnings call today, though, and that is they have two new production lines that just came on. One at an existing factory they have in Texas, and then another one in Georgia will come online next week, so that should help. Then they have two brand new factories that will come online next year, but there's not going to be too much relief in sight anytime soon. So kind of a tough time. We've seen, we've gotten press releases for like, hey, we're launching our new Pilsner in cans. And then that gets followed up the next day by saying, just kidding, that release date is going to have to be wrong. We're going to have to change. We don't have cans yet. So it's tough. But
has there been any shift from the industry on moving from like cans back to bottles? Because, ultimately when craft beer first started, it was all in bottles and went to cans. Is there any discussion among breweries to change that potentially back just due to the shortages?
So you would think that, but I had reported on a conference call last week. Lester Jones, he's the chief economist at the National Beer Wholesalers Association. So he really keeps an eye on kind of everything. So what Lester had found was that in the first 11 weeks of the year, no COVID, no problems, everything is kind of fine. Under normal circumstances, about 10% of the beer, 8 to 10% of all the beer that we drink comes through kegs. And 60% is in cans and 32% is in bottles. So after week 12 is really, that week in March when everything shut down and everything changed. And draft obviously went to 0% because all the bars, restaurants, and tap rooms had to be closed. But cans went up 2% and bottles only went up 1%. So it doesn't really look It doesn't really look like people are going to make that switch. Just when you think about the package, I know I would rather drink beer from a can, no offense to bottles, but they're easier to carry. They're easier to recycle. They're just lighter. When I used to work at Sam Adams, when we would get our 2 cases a month, as soon as we had switched to cans, it was funny. I noticed I almost always selected cans for my monthly beer cases because they're just lighter. They're way easier to carry a 12-pack of cans than a 12-pack of bottles, especially when you're taking the subway. So.
Yeah, I look at other brands like Dogfish Head, New Belgium, which have traditionally more of the bottle and the glass bottle sense, which is more of a brand choice, I would assume, than anything else. But I found the same thing with me is that I'm looking for cans because they're easily transportable. They're not going to shatter if you drop them. It'll probably get pretty damaged, but they're not going to shatter everywhere. But it's interesting to see that people are not shifting to bottles and sticking with their own cans because I guess they have those massive canning lines. They have those mobile canning units. They're not going to change either. So they have to find a way to get their beer out there, which kind of good segue into, what are breweries doing to kind of make ends meet. And we've talked to many people on this show as well about how, there's a lot of danger right now with breweries potentially closing because of COVID. What have you seen really in your reporting that shows, is there any promise or just a greater sense of excitement that potentially they're going to get through this situation, or is this still more of a grim details on the future of these small craft breweries in there if they cannot get the beer out or COVID doesn't go away quickly?
That's a great question. So in the beginning, in mid to late March, I think things seemed a lot very scary and very concerning, and I felt like I was obviously haven't been to the office, so I was just home in my living room, writing about layoffs and closures and all this, and there was a lot of uncertainty. And then as a lot of brewers got the hang of curbside and delivery and things like that, they figured out how to operate under circumstances that were allowed. And those were really a lifeline. That really helped a lot of small brewers out. We've heard from a lot of people, like, if we couldn't have done this, we would have been in a lot of trouble. Same thing goes for the Paycheck Protection Program. PPP loans really saved a lot of craft breweries, but the Brewers Association, who is the trade group that represents small and independent craft brewers, put out a notice last week about the can shortage. And they're like, this could be a business ending event if brewers cannot get the package that they need to get their stuff out. So I think, for everybody at home, like the biggest takeaway here, I would say, is just keep supporting your local breweries because they do really need you.
Absolutely. And, there's a question here from the chat here from Max, and he said, what happens to the recycled aluminum? Is it not being used to recreating the cans? And I don't know if you know this question here, but I would have to assume that, there's people in the chat, some of the metal is lost in recycling, only glass is completely recycling. But, you talk about everybody is doing to go. I mean, this is not something where in the past, where it was more of a 50-50 thing or even less than that. Everybody has to do something to get the beer out there. So even with recycling, I don't know if that would even get you what you need from that perspective from a small brewer. So I definitely echo your statements, Jess, about the fact that supporting local breweries and picking up, or even doing growlers, if you have a glass growler too, might help the situation here. But, this is just a pretty amazing event. I don't think many people are talking about it. Cans is taken for granted so much easily, but this is kind of really big news.
Right. Well, and the other problem is that it's not just beer that needs cans. It's all sorts of other, sodas, seltzers, all sorts of other non-alcoholic beverages. That was a great question, Max. I think there's just kind of a backlog that, Ball and Crown is the other company. They're doing as much as they can, but there's just so much demand.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. Obviously with COVID, we always say on this show to kind of to try to support your local breweries. There's a lot of options to do to go and curbside pickup. In your experience, from one of the stuff that you've been saying, what is the most common thing that brewers are doing that's seeing the most success out of it? Because obviously, if you're a tap room only and you don't have food or anything of that nature, you're relying 100% on your draft sales from that perspective. Are they seeing more in terms of the delivery method? I know that some states now allow you to deliver directly to the consumer, but most people are just doing curbside. What is the kind of flavor that you've been seeing most breweries seeing success at?
So I think everybody that has tried both of those has seen success with both. I know we had, at Brewbound, we do a show every Thursday called Frontlines at 3 p.m. I want to say maybe in April, we had the team from Trillium on, and they were telling us that, and Trillium had launched their delivery service, which seems wildly successful. If you follow them on Twitter, like the delivery windows get announced at like maybe 9 a.m. and sometimes
sold
they
out
sell
immediately.
Minutes. But JC and Esther said that they're like down 70%. So even with what looks like it's great, you still make way more money selling beers over your own bar. So go ahead.
Oh, sorry, you go ahead.
I know.
Well, you know what? I'll talk. You can drink a beer because you haven't had a sip yet. So there we go. But talking with them as well. The question is, will they keep delivery out after COVID's gone? And what they've told me is that, look, the reason why we're able to deliver to so many areas is because no one's on the road right now, and getting to those locations are so easy to do. But when people start driving again, it's going to be harder for them to deliver day in and day out. Well, she's probably another question really here in your experience. There's been so many laws that have been changed because of COVID to help these smaller breweries. Do you think some of these will stay after the virus? Well, we don't even know when the virus is going to leave, but after COVID potentially is gone from that perspective? Or is this more of a kind of temporary thing in your eyes for the stuff that they're trying to do to help the breweries?
No, I think a lot of this is going to be permanent because consumers aren't going to care. You can't say, oh, well, now your brewery can deliver you your beer, but 6 months from now they can't do it. A consumer, that doesn't matter to them. Some of the things that we've seen are in Michigan. Michigan's governor signed into law the creation of these things called social districts, which are people need to be outside. Being outside is much healthier than being inside. So if there's several businesses that have liquor license in an area, like let's say, in the downtown of a small town in Michigan, there's, a brewery and, 2 bars and a restaurant on the same block or two. That whole area now becomes some place where you can walk around with a beer. Where right now you can't just stroll the streets with a beer, but their liquor license cover the whole area. So that's, I think, really interesting. And that does have a sunset date on it. But I think measures like that, are going to be really helpful I want to say several states have allowed, first they started allowing bars and restaurants to sell, beer and wine or even cocktails to go. And a lot of places have made that permanent. just because
Yeah.
those restaurants aren't going to make all that money they need on food to go. So they really needed those margin boosters.
Yeah, it's incredibly important. You think about restaurants; they make a majority of their sales mainly on bars and and alcohol sales. So there are a couple Mexican restaurants around where I live that they are selling you tequila in a glass box as you make your margaritas at home, and they can make some markup on that particular situation. So it's really crazy from that perspective there. Let's go to some questions here. This one's from Andrew, and Andrew says, question from Greg and Jess. Speaking of aluminum, have you noticed a trend in crowlers over growlers? I haven't personally. Maybe so you have insights on that, Jess, on your side?
Anecdotally, I think that's kind of the way that everybody had gone before COVID. And then when taproom service shut down in March and April, there started to be a run on crowlers. And because, everybody had these kegs full of beer that they needed to get, they needed to sell. So Ball definitely ran tight on crowlers in April. But I did talk to a growler company that said that they had a huge uptick in sales too, and they were able to rush orders and they were getting growlers out to the market to people who needed them. Because with a growler, you don't need a machine to fill it. A crowler, you do.
Correct.
So.
Yeah, and also some places don't even allow you to bring your own growlers because of sanitary issues from that perspective too. So, you're kind of a catch-22. Obviously, you'd think maybe there'd be more growlers because there are less cans in population and aluminum. But at the same time, I've seen so many breweries say, hey, look, we can't actually put this out there because of sanitary issues. But I totally understand. I mean, we're in an unprecedented time, and it is crazy to see how many of these things that we kind of take for granted on a regular basis kind of fall off the wagon from that perspective there. If you join us late, we're talking to Jess, who's a reporter over at brewbound.com. If you have a question for Jess, use the chat on your device, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube. We'd love to give some questions out there for Jess. But let's shift a little bit here, talking a bit about where you're located. You're in Salem, Massachusetts. Tell us about the beer scene in that area there. Maybe if people don't know where Salem is, we're actually located in Massachusetts.
Sure. So Salem is about 15 miles north of Boston on the coast. It's delightful. I'm really glad they no longer hang contrarian women here because I would be in trouble. We have two breweries. We're lucky. We have Notch, which is, I'm drinking their beer. They are celebrating 10 years this year, but they didn't open their location here until 2016, I want to say. And then we also have Eastern Regiment. Ooh, that would have been bad. They opened last summer. They're not too far. So they both make really great beers. It's really nice to have two different places to go to just get something super local. But there's a lot of breweries up here on the North Shore. So Beverly is the town north of me, and they have quite a few. Channel Marker, Old Planters, Backbeat, Gentilly. We really are not hurting for beer here, which is great.
Yeah, that's great. You got to be happy with that choice from that perspective. Obviously, with COVID-19 and people not traveling, we don't recommend going obviously to Salem this time. But if somebody was going up there, what would be your kind of up and coming brewery that maybe is off the radar to most people, but is something that you definitely want to check in and check out their brew pub there?
Sure. So Great Marsh is in Essex, which is another beach town north of me. It's right by, so like the biggest beach in Massachusetts, not the biggest, but like the beach that we go to is called Crane Beach, and it's kind of a big deal. People come there from all over, beautiful spot. So my husband and I, is like our tradition is to hit Crane and then spend the afternoon at a nearby oyster bar called CK Pearl. And just the other day, it must have been, it was probably in June because we were out of town for about a month. But we had stopped by this brand new brewery called Great Marsh, and it was excellent. I want to say they opened in November. And they're definitely in like a really seasonal spot. So that's tough to open in the off season for where you are. And then when you should be in the middle of your crazy busy time, it's a global pandemic. But every beer we had from them was excellent. Their view was gorgeous. They're right on this marsh with like winding rivers. We had a few appetizers. They were really good. So great spot.
Awesome. Well, one of the great things with beer, and obviously talking about the trends that you're seeing here is the trends in the industry. And obviously, with your reporting and some of the data we have on the tap, we can see trends happening in real time. We've asked this question a lot to many people across our show here, but, obviously being on the industry side here, would love to hear your comments on the hard seltzer craze. I mean, I like to look at this situation similar to the root beer craze that used to happen about 5 years ago with Not Your Father's Root Beer. Is this something that you really think is going to stick around here, or is this something that's just a summertime treat that people just happen to flocking to because of what's happening with everything that's going on?
No, sir. So seltzer is very much here to stay. And when you think about why seltzer is popular, that's kind of what will show you why it's going to be so successful. It's rooted in health and wellness. So it really
Right.
it's lower in carbs, lower in sugar, lower in calories. And I personally don't feel terrible the next day after drinking a bunch of seltzer. So that's part of it. Seltzers also tend to be a little bit sleeker. They look a little bit more premium, and that's certainly something that consumers have really started to go for more and more in recent years. They like something that does seem like it's a little bit of higher quality, and holding that can often is what a marketer would call a badge.
Yeah, status symbol.
Yeah, exactly. So seltzer really it's funny that you bring up root beer, because that was what, 2015?
Yeah, 2015. Yep.
And like so popular, like
Huge.
flamed out really fast. Well, like one bottle was 320 calories.
Yes. Well, you couldn't drink all of it. It was also too sweet. So like, with hard seltzer, I feel like you can drink more than one of those. And with Not Your Father's root beer, I almost couldn't get through a full one by myself. It was just too sweet, and that's definitely different with hard seltzer.
I want to say maybe in a weird way, hard seltzer is almost the market correction to hard root beer, but it definitely it's has sticking power. So I looked up some Nielsen numbers before we chatted, because I knew you were going to ask. And Nielsen, and if you're following along at home and don't know, they track sales through chain stores. So if you want to know how much of what category of beer is selling, they're definitely the people that can tell you. So for their numbers that came out ending July 11th, that's the most recent reporting they've put out, hard seltzers earned $3 billion in sales in the last year. So, yeah. So, and that's a 241% increase over last year, which itself was 150% increase over the year before it.
Yes.
So they're just getting more popular. What's funny about seltzer, though, is that it's really a game of a top two, maybe top three.
Yes.
So,
yeah, it's a very important note that you put that there. We're actually running a story tomorrow, a little future blog post that we're doing tomorrow about some of the numbers that we have with hard seltzer. And interesting enough, we look at the numbers from last year of number of beers created on tap versus the number this year. And it's unbelievable, and not just in pure numbers, but number of brewers participating in the hard seltzer market. So people always think that, White Claw and Truly and the big ones out there are going to dominate. And yes, they are in terms of popularity, like you mentioned. But the wide variety of breweries are participating in this is astounding to me. And talking to a lot of breweries on this is, the common question we always hear is like, we can't keep them off the shelf. They're always they're just being pulled off shelf, one after another, and they're just being completely consumed by the community. And then the hard seltzer versus the root beer scenario, that only lasted for one summer. We have data from the last 2 summers, and it's still kind of going hockey stick style. So, I agree with you. I bring it up in a question I always like to pose in case you are against it. I knew that you weren't, but I think it's just an interesting phenomenon. What's happening with the industry? It's not just the people that don't like potentially maybe beer, but brewers are making them. So it's like they're trying to bring them in either way they can.
Exactly. I mean, whatever you got to make to keep the lights on, like you absolutely should make. But I remember when I worked at Sam Adams, and parent company is Boston Beer, who makes Truly, and we were like talking about making Truly, and I was like, what in the what? Like, we can't make like alcoholic water. That's crazy. And then we did, and it's really good. Like,
the funny thing is, I told this in the show before, is I'm actually not a huge carbonated beverage individu. So I don't drink seltzer by itself or Coke but I have no problem with beer even though it's carbonated. But for hard seltzer, you mentioned about the wellness factor here. It's also gluten-free. So, people that are gluten intolerant that want to have that experience can still have it there as well. And all around, I think that's a key part of why it's successful, is because of this wellness feature of it. And it's seltzer. It's good for you, quote unquote. But it's a weird phenomenon from that perspective. There's a question here in the chat. This one is from America's Favorite Hoarder. So what's everyone's opinion on the fruit beer trend? Personally, I hate it. To be honest with you, fruit beer for me is more of like on the sour side. I've been seeing more of that kind of situations happening where they're taking a beer and they're putting fruit inside of it. Also with the summer months, I've seen a lot of like fruit smoothie beers. Those are obviously a big discussion of everyone's been talking about. What's your take on this, Jess, on what the fruit beer kind of trends are when it comes to beer?
So it sounds like to me we're talking about like fruited like kettle sours and stuff like that. Because I tried I tried to float a theory weather balloon a few months ago that hard seltzers were killing like fruited wheat beers, but I tried. There's no data to support that. It was just an idea that I had. I'm kind of with you. I don't really like things that have a whole lot of texture, and I personally don't really like when beers have lactose because it gives me a lot of agita. But I mean, hey, if people like it, like let the people drink it. I feel like beer really kind of needs everybody drinking the stuff that they can get. So
totally agree. I feel like it's something that everyone has a taste for. We're talking about Hefeweizen on the show earlier, and that's and people love Hefeweizen beer. Maybe it's not a crazy style like Hazy IPA, but people still like that. So there's a wide variety of those styles there on that front here. Here's another question from Aaron, and Aaron said, "I've seen a rise in Hazy IPAs over the past couple of years." Duly noted. Do you know why Hazy IPAs have become so popular? Jess, I'll let you answer this one. I'll add my piece at the end as well.
Great question, Aaron. So this is just my thought as a person who drinks beer and knows about beer. This is not at all the thought of anybody who is a beer reporter. I think people like Hazy IPAs because they are not as bitter as West Coast IPAs. I think people kind of found that they could drink these beers and they didn't quite have that much of a bite to them. But people also, I know a lot of people who maybe are a little bit newer to drinking beer, maybe don't really drink beer. They kind of just think that IPA is a synonym for craft beer. Yep. So I think that this was a good way to get people into the segment, because maybe if they've tried an IPA and found it off-putting, like a traditional West Coast that was really like bitter and piney, and they didn't like that, these beers offer them something that they can drink that they like, and then they know that, okay, this is a style that I like. A lot of other Hazy IPAs, I'm sure you know better than anybody, have like the collection factor. You know, people are all about getting to some brewery on a release day and trying it. And I don't know, what do you think?
From my perspective, Jess, I think it's exactly what you said. I think the hop factor and the bitterness factor is a huge part of why it's successful. Is that people can drink a Hazy IPA and not feel like their entire palate is destroyed that a regular West Coast or a piney IPA has. So I think it allows more drinkers to get into the space. And IPA is the most popular style, not just on tap, but I think in generally, if you're a brewery, you don't make an IPA, either you're specifically trying to target lagers or pilsners or whatever, but that's the number one type of style we see a lot of breweries do. I think allowing this hazy factor to it allows more people to come to your brewery and say, hey, I like juicy IPAs, not necessarily so hop forward ones, so that it makes it easier for you to drink and get people in the door. I think it's more of an inclusion kind of thing, of get everyone trying to drink a more popular beer from that perspective. But there are also the whales, right? You mentioned about the beers that people just want to get no matter what, and that's kind of leads into those discussions from there. But a great question, because everyone kind of just assumes Hazy IPA is just the way that people have to make beer now. You don't have to make an Hazy IPA, but if you want to capitalize on the market share, you might want to try to do that for sure.
The last trip I took anywhere ever was to CiderCon, which is like the American Cider Association's business conference, to California. And I was having like a West Coast IPA at a bar in San Francisco. And it had been so long since I had one, because I live in New England. This is where Hazy IPAs came from. And it was just like, I forgot what this beer tasted like. And it was really good, but like really piney and really bitter, and it almost like kind of set me back a second, because I was like, holy cow, like what is happening?
Yeah, it's crazy because you look at it from a perspective of like, you have so many Hazy IPAs right now. This is a New England IPA, very hazy, can't see through it. And you'll have a piney one like a Blind Elder or something that's really, personally I like Blind Pig better than Blind, but don't at me, don't hate me on that one. But I think for the most part, you get used to that kind of juiciness, and you go back to a piney one, you're like, wow, this is different, refreshing, even though that was the original one that got you into it. So it's pretty crazy from that perspective there. But yeah.
Wait, hold your beer up again. See, that's really pretty. I feel like you get some easy IPAs that they look like dishwater. It's like what? Yes,
exactly. If you can't see through it, from my perspective, it's better. So sometimes you get more of a sediment where you look through, you can see the floaties around. That's not probably a good thing from that side, but definitely a huge fan of this style. Yeah, no, of course not. But this is a very, very good kind of flavor from there on that side. Let's go to another question here. This one's from Adam. Adam asks, anyone else knows brewers are selling more small batch and cans on the market shelves than they used to? I suppose because the tap rooms are closed. I see this a lot in Ohio. What about your insights on that, Jess? Is that something you've seen or heard?
No, it's a great question, Adam. I'd assume that probably has a lot to do with it. And I think probably retailers are seeing that they can get different products in. So kind of what happens is there's usually 2 different times a year when stores will reset their shelves, spring and fall. And the spring resets did not happen this year. We're hoping that the fall ones do. But what I'm guessing is that probably, Adam's store in Ohio, without having an official reset, just said, hey, let's try it out. And probably had local reps coming in and pitching different things. And they're just trying it because they know everybody's drinking more at home.
Yes.
Usually where you try and sample things is at a bar or at a restaurant. So I really feel for anybody who's trying to launch a new beer right now without the ability to sample people. Like, I don't know. That's traditionally, at least in my old life, we would, launch a new product at draft, on draft, and then 3 months later have it released into package. So
yeah, totally agree with you. It's probably exactly what you said there. People just want beer on shelves so that people can buy them, whether it's in grocery stores or bottle shops. So really kind of cool there from that perspective. Ultimately, people are drinking a lot at home. We have the Untapped at Home venue you can check into on Untapped. We just crossed 21 million check-ins since we launched this back in late March. So you can essentially see people are continuing to drink heavily at home, which is good. Obviously, supporting those things is important. From that perspective there. I want to throw this comment up on the board here. This one's from Mark. It says, love the Treehouse Growler. Please behind you. Right over here on this other side here. There's a Treehouse Growler. One important thing, if you ever go to Treehouse, hopefully in the future, great brewery up in Massachusetts, make sure you buy the growlers there. They do not fill, unless it says change, growlers from other breweries in that location. I believe it's a law of the state, but I could be wrong with that.
You are right. That is
I never understood that one.
I don't know. Yeah, it's weird. I would say maybe if you don't want to refill anything at all, sure, but it has to have that brewery's logo on it. That is true. And if you do go to Treehouse, go down the road and eat at BT Smokehouse.
Oh, so good. So good. The best part about that place too, and I'm not sure if they still do this, is that you can actually buy the cans from Treehouse and actually open them there, because there's no one sells Treehouse in a bar restaurant. They just are distributing exactly to the customer. So you can grab your cans there to drive up the road. You have really good barbecue, and you can open up your cans there. So highly recommend that choice you just made there. Awesome. Well, Jess, it's been awesome talking to you this evening about all this great stuff within the COVID world, your experience.
This was so much fun.
This is a lot of good time. We're drinking a good beer. Hopefully try to make this a virtual occurrence in a physical world, trying to do that. But obviously we know about COVID and won't let us do that. But want to give you a chance to give any final remarks where people can find you on the interwebs, anything you want to plug from your perspective here.
I mean, I am not a particularly interesting person to follow on the interwebs, but if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's just my name, Jessica Infante. If you want to keep up with what we are reporting on, it's brewbound.com. And yeah, just keep supporting your local breweries because they really need you.
Yeah, you also guys launched a brand new business model for Brewbound. You can subscribe to some of the content there. So if you're a big fan of that, definitely recommend it. It's got great articles there, and we would highly recommend checking us out.
Thanks.
Very cool. Well, Jess, thank you so much. We appreciate you being on, and thanks for being part of the Happy Hour.
Thank you for having me. Cheers.
Awesome. Thanks you guys for watching our virtual Happy Hour on Thursday in my makeshift studio in my parents' in-laws' house. It is what it is. I want to give you an update of what's happening next week. We're going overseas, not physically, but we're going to be doing a UK happy hour for the next 3 days, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. On Tuesday, we're going to be talking with Natalia Watson, who is Beard with Nat, a podcast and editor. All these events will start at 2:30 p.m. Eastern time if you want to check them in from the States here. We have a special Wednesday talking to Steve Dunkley, who's the owner of Beer Nuavu, which is a beer bar in Manchester, not Manchester, Connecticut, Manchester, the UK. And then finally on Thursday, I'm really excited about Matthew Curtis, editor-in-chief of Beer and Cider, and a lot of other things he's working on, as well as a new book he just announced as well. So make sure to check into that. All the information you can find on all the shows at untapped.tv. And if you miss any shows, you can check them out there. And if you don't want to watch me on a video for 35 minutes, because I know it gets kind of boring, we have audio podcasts for all of our shows as well, wherever you listen to your podcast, whether it's Apple, Google, or wherever. Thank you so much for watching tonight. We really appreciate you tuning in. We apologize for the Tuesday delay. We'll get that with Matt Galligan back in the future. Thank you very much. Have a great night. Cheers.